Let me zoom in a little bit. Let's do, I don't know, number, I don't know.
Let's do 5 and 6.
No, we'll do 5. 5 is probably, it looks like it might even be the hardest one.
5?
Doesn't it? All right, what's the first thing you got to do when you're going to use the quadratic formula?
Add the 7.
Add the 7. You got to get a 0 on one side, right?
And you do both sides.
Okay. As soon as it's done focusing here. All right, so we're going to add 7 to both sides in order to get that 0 on one side. All right, here we go. Add 7. Now be careful, again, keep it lined up here with your constants and like terms. So I'm going to add 7 to the constant term here. Oh, stop. If anybody deserves to go back to bed, it's me. All right, so here's my... Uh-oh, I'm going to have a coughing fit here soon. So I got my negative 3n squared minus 7n, and then plus 26.
Yes.
Okay, I like to list out my A, B, and C, but that's me. So here my A is negative 3, my B, negative 7, and my C is 26. Okay, and let me see if I can remember this formula off the top of my head. Let's see, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by, good, 2a. Look at that. Being sick for a week, and I can still do it off the top of my head.
You still got it, Mr. D.
Still got it. No, I don't know for how long, I don't know. Okay, so x equals negative b. So be careful. My b is negative 7, right? So I need negative b plus or minus the square root. And there's a lot of ways, a lot of kids do this different ways, okay? Some students put the whole thing in the calculator. Some students know how to program it in their calculators to actually put the formula in there. And so however you want to do it, it's fine with me. But whenever you have a negative number, try to always put that negative number in parentheses, because it's so easy to make a mistake with all this going on here, right? Okay, so I have negative 7 squared minus 4. I even like to put this 4ac in parentheses. My a is negative 3, and then my c is 26. All divided by 2 times my a, which is negative 3. Now, again, I know so many students that like to put this all in the calculator. And yes, ma'am.
For the test, will you give us the formula?
Sure, I'll give you the formula. That's fine. If you do this in a calculator, you have to put at least the denominator in parentheses, okay? Because otherwise you're going to put this all in there, and then you're going to hit divided by 2 times negative 3. What your calculator is going to do is do this whole calculation first and divide it by 2, then multiply it by negative 3. So in order to keep this as a denominator, if you put the whole thing in your calculator, you have to put parentheses around your entire denominator.
We taught him how to put it in with just the discriminant first and then work from there.
That's what I like to
It's
do.
safer.
Okay?
Right.
I was taught to do this separately and then plug it back in there. Okay. So that's the way I normally teach my students. Do that separate. Okay? So, and do it in a couple of steps. So I have the square root of -7 squared. Again, if you're using your calculator, make sure you're putting the negative sign. Sorry. Make sure you're putting that negative sign in parentheses. So I have 49 minus, well, let's see. This I'm going to put in the calculator. That's even too much for my brain, especially now that it's squishy.
How do I put another divide thing again? Did I put it all in? Did I put the whole thing in parentheses?
For,
The denominator?
yes, you'll have to put that whole thing in parentheses. Like that. So you need a double set. I hope it doesn't start up. Okay, so I got 4. Let me clear that up. 4 times -3 times 26. And I get -312. So 49 minus -312. And because I got a double negative here, use that, remember that 2/ rule thing.
Make it a positive.
Make it a positive. So 49 plus 312 equals the square root of 361. That might be a perfect square.
361.
I'm going to check to see if it's a perfect square. See, second x squared, 361. And it is. It's 19. I thought it was a perfect square. So the square root of 361 is 19. Now, I'm going to take that 19, substitute it back in for this whole, it's called the discriminant, for this whole discriminant. Okay, so I'm going to keep everything else the same. So this equals, bless you, bless you. I hope you didn't get my disease. So -7 is +7. My plus or minus 19, all divided by -6, right?
Where is that coming from? How is it in the fraction? The 7 and the 19.
Okay, the 7 comes from, I just got rid of this double negative, said, hey, that's a +7. Okay, plus or minus my discriminant, and instead of putting all this there, I'm going to take and put the 19 in there for the discriminant. Okay. And then the denominator is 2 times -3, which is -6. Okay, now, remember what I told you about that little plus and minus sign? I've been kind of emphasizing it from the whole time here. That's two numbers, right? It's a plus 19, so we have 7 plus 19 and 7 minus 19. So what I'd like to do at this point, go ahead and split it up into two problems. Okay? So I have my 7 plus 19 divided by -6, and I just work that out. So 7 plus 19 is 26 divided by -6, and it doesn't divide out evenly, but we can reduce this fraction, right? And if you want to do it the easy way, remember, yeah, you can use your handy dandy calculators, right? 26 divided by -6. Hit enter, math, enter, enter, and it reduces it for you. -13/3. So it crosses my x-axis when x is -13/3. Well, that's one of them. And then the other one, 7 minus 19 divided by -6, right? 7 minus 19 is -12 divided by -6. -12 divided by -6 is +2. Okay, so my x-intercepts -13/3 and +2. Okay, so that's a review of what we did yesterday, right? So go ahead and do this worksheet, and then any questions on this? I know Mrs. Meyer did a wonderful job, so I didn't think there'd be any questions. Okay, and then I gave you this review of solving quadratic equations, and that's what this whole unit has been pretty much about, right? Except for the quadratic modeling. Now, we had, what, four ways now? Okay, so this is the first method I taught you, right? This was method number 1. Solve each equation by factoring, where you factor, then set each factor equal to 0. And you guys had tons of fun with that. Okay, so that was the first method. Then the second method was by taking the square roots. So this was method number 2. Okay, and I only put a couple of those on because that actually was probably the easiest one. Then we did solve by completing the square. Now, this was probably the hardest one, I think. I think it's even harder than the quadratic formula. Okay, and I'm assuming that you guys probably need practice on this one. More practice. Right? So let's go ahead and do one of these. All right? Let's make sure we have an adequate hard one. Actually, these all look actually kind of a little tough. Not too bad.
How about 14?
You want to do 14? All right, let's do 14. Okay, completing the square. Now, if you want the formula for this on the quiz, I'll give it to you too. Completing the square, remember we have to put it in the first two terms, right? In other words, if it's in standard form, ax squared plus bx plus c, okay, first of all, make sure, well, actually, you don't have to make sure that y equals 0. What you have to do is you have to get the first two terms by itself, right? And then you have to add back to it a perfect square to make it a perfect square trinomial, so that when you factor it, you get a perfect square binomial. So there's a lot of ways to. This is hard. It's not easy. Okay. So if I'm looking at number 14 here, I have the ax squared by itself, but I need the bx, the x to the first term, over on the other side. Okay? So here, I'm going to subtract 20x from both sides. Now, be careful. These are unlike terms, right? So I have, let's see, I have my x squared. I have my minus 20x. So there's my first two terms. Okay. I'm going to leave this on the right-hand side, the 96. But then I'm going to have to find a perfect square to add to these two terms, right? So I'm going to be adding a number here, which is a perfect square. But don't forget I have to do it to both sides. Right? Okay, in the formula for finding that perfect square is you take b, divide it by 2, and then you square it. That's the perfect square that we're going to be adding in these blanks. So I'm going to take my b, which is negative 20, divide it by 2. I'm going to square it. Okay. So negative 20 divided by 2 is negative 10, and I need to square it. Negative 10 squared is 100. So that's what I'm adding as my perfect square. 100 is a perfect square, right? By the way, you can only use completing the square when a is 1. Okay? If you can't get that a to be 1, you can't use this method. All right. So when I did that, I made this a perfect squared trinomial. So it's going to factor to a perfect squared binomial. And that perfect squared binomial is our x. And then here's the base I'm going to use, the minus 10. If you write out this step, then it's actually pretty easy to do. Okay, now I always forget. A lot of times I forget. Hey, I'll just put the 100 there. But we're actually adding the 96 to that 100, right? So 196. Now, I have to get rid of the power of 2. Get rid of the power of 2 by taking the square root. Now I can drop my parentheses. Isn't 196 a perfect square? Is that 14 squared? Is it 14 squared? Okay. All right, so I have plus or minus. Don't forget, we got to now put our plus or minus in there because we took the square root. 14. Still have to get x by itself, right? So I'm going to add 10 to both sides. I'm going to put it over here. Okay. So my x. Now these are like terms. So I'm going to take positive 14 plus 10 gives me a positive 24. And then I'm going to take negative 14 plus 10 gives me a negative 4. So completing the square is by far, I think, the hardest one of all the methods. What you think? But you got to know how to do it for if you're taking, especially if you're going to go on to pre-calc.
You always divide it by 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of times, now, a lot of times you'll get a fraction here to the square, and then kind of becomes a nightmare. But we've kind of backed off on that a little bit because it's hard enough, I think. Any other questions? Does that give you enough review knowledge to practice with these? All right. I know these take a lot of time. We'll work on these today and tomorrow. Maybe even start the review tomorrow. I don't know. Depends on how far you get. Okay. But please use your class time wisely.
Hey, is Adam's in front of you? Yeah.
And please ask questions.